A lot of things are going on with the coronavirus, and a lot of the sports world has kind of been upended. And I'm hearing rumors that most things outside of professional or sports entertainment wrestling is being canceled until June. Are you hearing the same things? And what's your initial thought on no sports for about 2 months?
Yeah, Morgan, thanks for having me on. I got to be on WSPA Channel 7 on Thursday night when all this stuff was kind of breaking down. So it's been a really interesting couple of days as you try to, decipher what's going on, number one. But number two, you're kind of parsing through the language, right? Postponed, canceled. There's all kinds of different things. Can you go back later and uncancel? I think is a good question. So obviously, it's an interesting time. It's one we've never seen before. It's very sad. I mean, if you're a sports fan, I don't want to make light of the seriousness of what we're all facing with the virus, but we're staring down the barrel of 4 weeks, 8 weeks, 12 weeks with no sports at all for the first time in our lives. And for somebody who loves sports as much as I do, just like you, Morgan, it's going to be a big challenge. And for content creators like you and myself, it's going to be a gigantic challenge, right? Because people are still going to want to talk about sports. And without any games being played, it's going to be really interesting and unique. So, my guess and my hope is that we're going to get, 4 weeks into this thing maybe and start putting a path together to resumption of play, or the kicking off of play of baseball or something like that. So that's what my hope is that we're getting into the month of May and sports are returning to us as we know it. And the sooner the better, right?
Yeah, and a lot of people have asked me about what am I going to do with my show. I look at places like Packer and Durham, and I just saw recently where Mark Packer said that he covers all ACC things, and they're going to go on a break until further notice. So I haven't made a decision. Have you made a decision on whether or not you're going to make a break or take a break?
I haven't. I do a number of different things, right? So I'll still be filling in up at Channel 7 on the regular. I'm on next Sunday. I had the Mark Childress show on the Roar, Wednesdays 7 to 9. Haven't heard anything official from the Roar yet. I think everybody's kind of trying to figure out what they want to do. And then I am, curating, some other sports related content that is a little bit more timeless in nature. So I'll probably continue with that. So, I'd like to continue my show. I think a lot of the big sports organizations are taking the week off this week and probably trying to figure out what their plan's going to be going forward. And I just can't imagine that everyone's going to just stop and there'll be no content at all for a while. That doesn't seem like the right course. And personally, I love doing my show, just like I know you love doing yours. So I would hate to not do it or feel like I can't do it. So my show's a little bit less what's happening right now, and I have the luxury of only doing it once a week, and I chase things on the show that I feel like are a little bit longer form topics sometimes, rule changes in football, the effect of technology on the game and things like that. I've got a number of guests that I've been, wanting to have on my show that I could easily have on this Wednesday. And one or two of them I already have set up, right? That it's not about, hey, what's happening this week, but more like, hey, what's going to happen in the future. So that's a really long way of saying I don't have a plan yet, but when I do, I'll let you know.
Now, we're here at the Charleston Sports Pub because of T. Higgins and Isaiah Simmons signing autographs today. And these are two former Clemson Tiger players. It's difficult to say former, but former amazing elite Clemson Tiger players that are now making their way into the next phase of their life, and that is the NFL. Do you feel like that T. Higgins, let's start with T. Higgins. Do you feel like that T. Higgins not performing at the combine, he mentioned that he didn't feel like he had a big turnaround time because Clemson played so late in the season, and he also had kind of a lingering hamstring issue. Do you feel like him not being at the combine is a problem? Because I know that just a few weeks later he went to Pro Day, and from what I'm hearing, he did well there.
I don't think so. Maybe a decade ago it would have been a bigger impact, but with all the different, pro days and ways to get out there today, I think in the moment when T didn't run and didn't participate, that it was a big deal and kind of caught some traction. But him turning around a couple of weeks later and putting up, not jaw-dropping numbers, but very solid numbers for a guy his size. He helped himself at Pro Day this week, and I think he'll be fine. And, one of the nuances here of all of these delays, Morgan, is, Clemson kind of had an earlier Pro Day, right? I mean, a lot of schools haven't had their Pro Day yet. So depending on what the timing of all this is and what they do with the NFL draft, is there a scenario where Clemson's one of the few schools that actually got to showcase their players at a pro day? That could end up being a big advantage for T. Higgins and some of the other Tigers later on if NFL scouts don't have a chance to go to all these other pro days before the NFL draft.
Yeah, and again, we're talking to Mark Childress from WCCP 105.5 The Roar. And I wanted to ask you another thing, Mark, about going to Isaiah Simmons. We talked about T. Higgins and his pro day and what your thoughts were on that. But about Isaiah Simmons, he did go to the NFL Combine. And some are saying that he had one of the best overall days for any defender in the past 5-10 years. What were your thoughts on that? I mean, obviously he did great in the 40, but sometimes I'm a little skeptical with the 40 because you're not always running full speed in one direction when you're on the football field. What were your thoughts on his overall results?
Yeah, I mean, if you're a numbers nerd and you're a combine nerd, I mean, you could argue that Isaiah Simmons put up a top 15, top 20 combine performance ever. And one of the ones that jumped out to me the most was he has a higher vertical leap and a faster 40-yard dash than Julio Jones. And oh, by the way, he's a little bit taller and 25 pounds heavier. So Isaiah Simmons has been my favorite Tiger to watch the last couple of seasons, and I think the future will be even kinder to Isaiah and the role he actually played on this defense the last few years. Because when we look back 5-10 years from now, especially when he's a star in the NFL, we'll really realize how unique. I mean, he's a unicorn, right? I mean, we're never going to see a player like him again, and all the impact that he was able to make on the field and all the things that he was able to do. So, is Isaiah also kind of starting to usher in that new era? I mean, it's been an era of offense in the NFL, right? I mean, the numbers are getting crazy. They're throwing the ball more and more. Yards are going up. Scoring is going up. At some point, it's got to start going back in the other direction. And for a defensive coordinator to have a player as unique as Isaiah on their team, he's the kind of guy that can start, blunting, the offensive explosion that's going on in the NFL. Now, you need 6 or 7 of them on a defense to probably really shut it down. But I'm going to be interesting to see over the next few years if we don't start seeing more and more of these big-time uber athletes on the defensive side of the ball that can play multiple positions. It's kind of the secret sauce to starting to shut down these out-of-control offenses in the NFL.
Yeah, it's interesting that you mentioned that too, and I like that you brought that up because even in the NFL Combine, in the questions that he was asked to the media or from the media, one of the things was, how do you explain your style of play, or what position do you play? And his first answer was, well, I play defense. And then his second answer was, well, I really look at Tyrann Mathieu and some of the other guys, but he listed off a safety and then an outside linebacker and then a defensive end as kind of guys he tries to emulate or model his game after. So he really models his game after 3 different players that are NFL elite level players. Like you said, there's not many players who can consistently. And we saw it against teams like Texas A&M and teams like Virginia, where he could go and first down play safety, second down play outside linebacker, third down play defensive end, rushing the quarterback to get force a fourth down punt. So he could kind of do all 3 things in the same series, which I don't think a lot of people see. And then, as you mentioned, he also said that he feels like that the problem is a lot of these offenses are starting to heavily use the tight end more than they ever have, and that he feels like he can attack tight end positions better than anyone. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. I mean, you think about, Kelsey, or even, I know Gronk's not in the NFL anymore. I mean, when the tight end, burst happened, and all of these big time athletes with speed and size got on the scene, linebackers couldn't cover them anymore, right? And the version of the safety that was in the NFL then couldn't cover them because they were too small. So you got a guy in Isaiah Simmons that isn't as big as a linebacker and might be a little larger than the normal safety that you would see, but he's so athletic that you could put him on a player like that, and he could potentially shut them down. I mean, I would love to see that matchup. I just want Isaiah to end up on a team that's got a creative defensive mind, right? I mean, there's a lot of old school defensive guys in the NFL, and if a player picks Isaiah Simmons, that defensive coordinator is going to be like, he's either a linebacker or a safety. He's not going to do both, right? We're picking one, and that's where he's going. And I just hope he ends up with a place that lets him be who he is and lets him move around, or maybe even designs a brand new defense that allows him to be a showcase piece, kind of like what Brent Venables did, right? You can move him around and use him in a bunch of different oh, it's a running down. Well, I'm going to move him into the box. Oh, we know it's a passing down. Well, now he's playing free safety. I just hope he gets aligned with the right team.
Yeah, I agree. And kind of leading me into my next question for you is, or are the Washington Redskins that team?
Oh, come on. Now we're talking. So my Redskins have the number 2 draft pick. Chase Young is the best defender in the draft, is what everyone in the draft circles say, right? That he is a difference maker on the defensive line, uber talent, Clowney-like, can come in and make an immediate impact day one. If the Redskins at the number 2 position in the NFL draft choose Chase Young, I'm not going to be disappointed. But I'll tell you this. If they took Isaiah Simmons, and again, you've got Jack Del Rio now as the defensive coordinator in Washington. That defense is already pretty good in Washington. You get Jack Del Rio in a creative piece, chess piece like he is, that wouldn't bother me one bit. So in the back of my mind, I'm like, come on, man, bring the Clemson boy home to Washington. But I really think they'll stick with chalk and go Chase Young. But I think you'll see somebody either trade up or somebody will grab Isaiah Simmons in the top 10. He's that good, and they're going to be very happy when they get him.
I'm hearing some rumors that the New York Giants would be interested in him. Is that going to hurt you a little bit, knowing that he's then going to regularly play against the Redskins?
All right, so now we're treading into weird waters. Right? So Dexter Lawrence is on the Giants, and it didn't bother me this year. I was cheering for Big Dex. I'll cheer for these Tiger players wherever they go. It wouldn't make me happy. Now, we haven't had any of these Tigers go to the Dallas Cowboys. Now, if the Cowboys took him, it's going to be a dark day for me. I don't know how I'm going to figure that out, because the Cowboys are the one team in the NFL that I loathe and cannot stand, right? So if he goes to the Giants, I'll find a way to live with it. But, if he ends up being a, 6-time All-Pro terror that he could be, he's got that kind of upside in the NFL, I'm sure it'll irritate me more and more as it goes on.
Well, I had to.
Let's not put can Jacksonville get him? Can Oakland get him? Can just a random team that I don't really like or dislike get him, and not somebody in the NFC East, please?
Well, I wouldn't be.
Out in the world.
I wouldn't be surprised if Oakland goes after another Clemson player. Considering how many they took last year, it wouldn't surprise me again. But last 2 questions for you, and I'll let you go. T. Higgins, back to T. Higgins. Do you feel like that he's a first rounder? I know he's kind of some mock drafts. He's low first round or the end of the first round. Some mock drafts he's beginning of the second round. Some I've even seen where they have A.J. Terrell in the first round in place of where they have T. Higgins. And then I'll watch or I'll go read another article where it'll be flip-flopped, where A.J. Terrell will be at the beginning of the second round and T. Higgins will be at the beginning or the end of the first round. And then there's a lot of rumors about him possibly being a great fit with a young quarterback like Josh Allen at Buffalo. Do you think that T. Higgins has done what he needed to do to be a first-round draft pick, or what are your thoughts on it?
I do, but it's a really deep wide receiver class, right? I mean, there are legit. I mean, you're hearing 6, 8, 10 legitimate first round wide receivers on a typical year in the NFL, and T. Higgins is one of those. And I'm not questioning what T's done, and I'm not saying he did the right thing or the wrong thing. You know, in the back of my mind, I was kind of hoping T stuck around another year at Clemson, selfishly, so Clemson could have him for another year. And I don't think the wide receiver class in 2021 is going to be near as deep as this one. So is T. Higgins a round one talent? Yes. But it's going to come down to how things fall in the draft and what teams really want him, and are they going to bite on him in round one, or does he go in early to mid round two? I mean, I don't think he's dropping past the 50th or 60th pick in the NFL draft, which will be solid money and security for him, and it'll validate the decision that he made. And with guys like this, right, I mean, we were all angry when Deshaun Watson wasn't picked number one in the NFL draft, right, or even in the top 5, or even in the top 10. But he ended up being picked by a team in the Texans that were already a pretty good team. And I think that allowed Deshaun to get better faster, right? I mean, do you really want, like, the Cincinnati Bengals to pick T. Higgins as number one pick in the NFL draft? It would be great, but Cincinnati's a terrible football team. They're awful. So my hope with Terrell and Owens and Higgins is that they end up on either decent or good NFL teams where they can go in day one and win football games, right? That's what I hope. So with Higgins, hey, can the Packers get him? Can the Patriots get him? Can the Chiefs get him? Can somebody with a really good quarterback that we know T. Higgins can get separation? We know T. Higgins can go up and, you know, high point the football and do great things. Can we get him with a quarterback who can get him the football? I'm more interested in that than I am where he lands in the draft.
Yeah, and T. Higgins said the same thing, that he doesn't really care where he goes as long as he can contribute and make a difference for that team. And I think that's kind of what Dabo Swinney has developed in his players. You know, you get when you interview these players, you get a lot of the same responses, and I think it's because of that structure and that leadership and that example that the Tigers have passed on, and that professionalism that the Tigers have pushed on to these players, and they're willing to do whatever they need to do to make the team better and not focus so much on themselves, even though they're uber elite players. Going back to Dabo Swinney and development, and this is my last question for you before I let you go, but Swinney had 109, or he said that he had 109 of his players since he's been a head coach get the opportunity to play in the NFL, whether it be practice squad or what, or higher. 80% have made it. And, you know, it's not for long is what Dabo also says. The NFL stands for not for long. And there's not a lot of players who get that opportunity. You know, when you look back over the last decade of Dabo Swinney, did you ever imagine that this team would be where it's at right now, putting so many players into the NFL draft? Dabo says now that he has a good feeling that the previous year they had about 10 players get onto a team. This year he feels like he's very confident that 10 players will get on a team. And then he even feels like maybe next year that he has 10 guys that are going to be ready to get on NFL teams. You know, so 10 players a year to have the opportunity to play professionally is kind of unheard of. What are your thoughts on it?
I don't think anybody outside of Dabo would have ever guessed that this is where Clemson would be right now, either from a performance perspective on the field, from a culture perspective, or from a NFL talent perspective. So I'm excited and bullish, right? I mean, there's so many Clemson players in the NFL now, it's almost impossible to find any game on a Sunday or Monday, whenever they're being played, that doesn't have not just one player, but multiple players. And then you'd have games like the Chiefs and Texans playing last year, where there were, 6, 7, 8 guys legitimately on the field almost every play from Clemson. That just really makes me happy knowing that, number one, and the future's bright, right? I mean, if these recruits that are coming in here for 2020 are even close to the level that we are pretty sure that they already are, I mean, there are 4 or 5 guys that are starting to play at Clemson, in September this year that are more than likely going to be an NFL draft or going to be NFL players. And to be honest with you, if there wasn't, the play 3 years out of high school rule, there's some guys that might get drafted this year, right? Would be drafted now that are either playing on the team or coming in as freshmen. So future's bright, best is yet to come. We just think the NFL is chock full of Clemson players now. I'm just wondering 6-7 years from now, it's going to be insane how many players there are.
Yeah, I know growing up, looking at some of the rosters and getting some of the NFL football cards, that it seemed like there was a ton of those Alabamas and Oklahomas and Southern California type players where they were listed from their hometown and from their college. I don't think that football cards are popular as much as they used to be when I was a kid, but if you look at them, you probably see a lot of Clemson players or a lot of players with Clemson as their hometown, or even players who are nowhere near Clemson who have Clemson listed as their college of choice. And that includes Isaiah Simmons, who mentioned, hey, he didn't even know Clemson. He didn't know what it was about or who it was until he got offered from Kansas, and then Brent Venables came and offered him after that, and then he decided to give it a shot. And now we're seeing players from all over the nation, even as far as California. Maybe even one day we'll have an Alaskan and a Hawaiian player on the team. I know we already had a Hawaiian player in Pagano, but Dabo is not staying within the state boundaries, that's for sure. And players from all over are wanting to play with Clemson, and it's exciting to see. And I'm looking forward to the next, the Roaring 20s, as Dabo Swinney says. But Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show and talking about the NFL draft, talking about the 2 players that we have here, and also giving us some insight on what your plans are with all the terrible virus stuff that's going on. Hope everyone stays safe. And Mark, let us know what you got coming up. I know you just finished up doing a show today with the Roar, but let us know where my friends and followers can catch you.
Yeah, the Mark Childress show will now be every Wednesday night from 7 to 9 going forward, unless something weird happens and something changes. Also, a week from tomorrow, next Sunday, you'll see me on WSPA Channel 7 doing the sports on there, 6, 7, 10, and 11. And as always, Mr. Thomas, an honor to be on here with you, man. Thanks.